This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, thought I'd send you a voice note about a movie I seen just about 20 minutes ago, actually, called Terrestrial Verses, directed by Ali Asghari and Al-Riza Khatami. Two directors and two names that I absolutely butchered, so maybe your Iranian pronunciation is better than mine, but I'm recording this at home anyway, in my back office, as it's too much rain to go outside now for my daily walk, so you might have some cat commentary added onto this as well with a few meows, who knows. So I've been watching a lot of movies lately that me and you would categorize as safe choices, stuff like Mississippi Burning, The Homesman. Well, The Homesman might have been a boring choice for you, but these very put together movies in their structure, first act, second act, third act, very familiar beats, very familiar resolutions, very familiar scenes, I suppose, at times. Almost comfort food when it comes to movies. And I had a long string of those, and then I had a few movies that you threw my way that I didn't particularly enjoy, like Possum and Triangle. So I just finished work today, and I thought I'd pick something that is a little bit of a big swing. You know, one of those movies that have big critical acclaim, very championed on certain circuits, but at the same time you don't really know the reasons why, because these movies never really find their way into the general public. These are very much in the art sphere of film viewing. You're not going to see this unless you're at a festival, unless you're on the film critic circuit. So you never really get an audience perspective of it in the same way that you would very straight down the middle cinema movies, or even something like Sinners. You're going to get a audience perspective that just goes to the cinema in general, and then you're going to get a critic consensus. With these movies, I'm always very suspect of them, just how my own tastes mightn't necessarily align with the tastes of that particular buzz. Sometimes movies are deemed important pieces of culture, which doesn't really gel with my ethos of movie enjoyment, where I need to either be intellectually stimulated or just straight up entertained. As I said, I don't really go out of my way to watch movies because they're deemed culturally important. So I don't go into these movies with high expectations, but at the same time, it's something that I need to see for myself. So Terrestrial Verses, it's a series of short films, I guess, put together, or maybe an anthology is a better word, where you get these different vignettes of Iranian citizens going about their daily life. And The film actually opens with this really cool shot above the city of Tehran, which I believe is a city you visited once, if I'm not mistaken. You might have lost £1,000 there. I can't remember. I can't keep up with your travels in your 20s, but has this great shot of Tehran. So it's a still shot, and it captures the energy of a city over a very unspecified amount of time. And I don't think I've ever seen a shot capture the energy of a city in such a way. Now, I live in London and it's been very warm lately. So I've opened my window, and while I sleep to when I wake, I experience a lot of energy that the outdoors has to offer while I'm asleep, while I'm awake. Sometimes I watch movies in there during the day, and there's an ambience, there's a certain lighting, there's a certain time of day that I'll know it is without looking at a watch. And this opening scene I thought was really good and really tuned me into the wavelength of what a movie was going to be. We talk about this often, me and you, where you need to watch a movie when you're in the mood for it. You need to be in the right headspace, or you're going to fuck it up. You're going to fuck it up for yourself, and you're going to fuck it up for the movie. It's not just as simple as putting on a movie and just being in the mood for it, which will drastically dictate how you feel about it, which I think is something that is not talked about in film viewing experience. But I've never seen a movie that tuned me into the wavelength of it almost as an exercise to begin with. And I think that opening scene, whatever type of wavelength or rays was projected from the TV into my brain, it really calmed me down and set me in a nice type of lucid state to be very okay with the rhythm of this movie. Now, you could also say that I was looking for something different, so I'm just attributing something to something that isn't actually there. But if you get to this movie, it'll be very interesting to hear your thoughts on that opening scene. I thought this movie was very good. It held my attention through all the vignettes. I thought there was enough variety and enough distinction in the various characters and scenes to hold my attention and bring me through a wide range of emotions. And yeah, it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. I love the TV series The Wire. We grew up in Ireland, and now we live in England, which is a very bureaucratic nation in a different way to something like Ireland is. But our early Ireland had a hint of that old religion, that old vibe from maybe the 70s and 80s was still very present, even though it didn't dictate our upbringing as much as our parents. There were certainly signs. I remember my sister, when she was an altar girl, she made a mistake once, and one of the helpers of the church said, if she makes a mistake like that again, there'll be a permanent black dot beside her name or something like that. So there's all these old guard of enforcement still within Ireland at this time. And if you watch something like The Wire, they show you just how everyone is part of a system and how you can become complicit in the system, how you can not really rebel against the system. You can either try and change it from the outside, or you can try and change it from the inside. And these are themes that I think about quite often in my own life. And I think what Terrestrial Verses does extremely well, there's a version of this movie, well, not this movie, but there's a version of Iran you can probably get in a big epic blockbuster movie in the time of a revolution and massive change, to really see the type of serious things that go on in this country. My manager is, I think her dad's from Iran, and recently at work, I think it's her cousins were crying because of the situation going on there at the moment. And there's a lot of insane stuff that goes on there. So I think there's a version of that movie, or not so much that movie, but a depiction of Tehran that would really show you some epic atrocities that would get you insanely angry. But I think what Terrestrial Verses does so well is, after the opening scene of giving you a widescreen view from the distance of the city, it really gets into the heartbeat and the belly of the beast of showing you what exactly it is like to be an ordinary person in this everyday system. I remember when you see videos from war-torn countries like Syria and places like that, there would be these bombs going off and people going to the playground soon after, and people kicking a football around while these tanks are rolling through. And you'd wonder, how the hell do people get in the headspace to do that? But once something becomes the new normal to you, you fit into the system itself, whatever that means, unfortunately. And this movie really shows you, in the most subtle ways and sometimes the most infuriating ways and the most sinister ways, but in a very low-key expression that can communicate to you what it's like to live in a dictatorship that represses your spirit and represses your freedom in a way that a massive blockbuster showing insane stuff can ever do. Because we can all relate to these mundane experiences from our perspective, like trying to find a lost dog, like going for a job when you have no money, like trying to register the name of your kid or something like that. These everyday experiences that they show in these movies, we can relate to them from a Western perspective, because everyone ultimately does the same banal things in many different ways to an extent, even like buying our school uniform and going to a shop like that. And this movie shows you those scenarios that everyone goes through, and it makes it so relatable on one level, and it makes it so alien on another level. We get this opening scene where this guy is going to, I don't know where you go to register your children's name, maybe you can tell me, but he goes to this place and he says he wants to name his kid David, which I always thought was a Jewish name personally, but maybe I'm being ignorant and or misinformed to that fact. And the guy tells him that he's not able to name his kid David, and then they have a back and forth over what names are acceptable, and he's questioned as to why he would want to name his kid David, and then he realizes that he wants to name his kid David because it's his wife's favorite author. And then there's the back and forth where he asks him, why don't you name the kid after your favorite author? And then it's the name that I presume is pronounced Gollum Hussein, which Gollum, of course, from my perspective, is the person from Lord of the Rings. And I don't know if that is something that is meant to be picked up in that type of humorous way or not, but it's certainly played as, well, I wouldn't name my kid that between the two characters, so I presume it's not a name that's meant to be liked in any culture. And there's a few vignettes like this. There's one as well where the lady, she loses her dog and she's going to a police station because these two random police officers took the dog on the scooter because apparently you're not allowed to walk dogs. I think that's explained. And she goes to the police station, and I mean, you'll notice when you watch it, but the framing device of this movie is absolutely brilliant as well. It's usually someone either looking at the camera, which is a surrogate for the person they're talking to, although not always, there's a few variations. So we can normally just see one character at a time. In fact, we almost exclusively only see one part of a character at a time. Sometimes we get a few hand movements, but for the most of the other character, but for the most part, we see a character talking to a nameless figure. And I thought that framing device is brilliant for this. And I think we've even got an even smaller box ratio rather than widescreen to make it feel even more claustrophobic. But I'll expand on that in a minute if I remember. And yeah, so she's talking to this guy behind the counter, and he says he doesn't have her dog. And by this stage, we've seen about 8 vignettes. So we're already fed up with the authority figures in this city. So we're really not giving him the benefit of the doubt. So we hear a dog barking behind, and we presume that it's her dog. And he's saying, well, no, there's no dogs here. The police don't take the dogs. And we hear a dog, and she's calling her dog, and this dog is responding, who we don't get to see. And it sounds like a small dog. And he's saying that the dog is a German Shepherd, but it sounds like a Chihuahua. And eventually we do see the dog, and it turns out it isn't her dog. And at this stage, the authority is vindicated. And there's a scene where this cop, who may or may not be trying to do right by the world in the system he's in, but he says, oh, well, you can't find your dog. Why don't you take this dog? Because it's going to be pretty much put down, or that'll be the end of it. And then there's a debate in the lady, and she does decide to take it. And then the punchline to that joke is he'll meet her around the corner by this pastry shop to give her the dog. So he's doing something dodgy, and maybe he is working outside the system in the best way he can. I don't know, because at this stage I've got such a distrust for any authority figure that I don't want to give them the benefit of the doubt, which is actually what the lady also does, really, because there's such a mistrust of the authorities that she's almost right not to believe him. But the registering of the name, like David, and that scene where she's trying to find her dog, those situations and that dialogue and the type of low-key playfulness that comes about through those interactions is almost like something you would see in a mumblecore movie, which of course takes these real life situations and finds the humor and finds the comedy in it. And again, that's very relatable, where a system or something you come across is so bizarre, we've all been there in our own life, that you just have to shake your head and just almost can't believe what you're experiencing. And we can't believe what we're experiencing through the world that we're watching and through the emotions of the character, almost being baffled in what they are experiencing as well. So those moments give us a little bit of respite in what is a very infuriating film for somebody like me anyway, and I believe probably somebody like you who also I mean, we're Irish after all. We grew up on a disdain for authority, abusing people. I think that's certainly a cultural thing. And then we also get some other vignettes as well that are just heartbreaking, where we see this girl, she's very young, she's not subjected to the religious dogma yet, but she's certainly on the cusp of it when she goes school uniform shopping. And I think we can all relate again to being put in the school uniform for the first time. I could certainly relate to that, and I could smell the school uniform shop when I was watching this movie that I grew up and went to when I was about 5 or however I was when I went to school. And it's a very still shot, and we see these dull uniforms and frocks behind, but there's this little cute girl with lovely red hair, and she's dancing. I think she's got a Mickey Mouse t-shirt on, I might be wrong, and she's enjoying herself, she's dancing, and meanwhile, unbeknownst to her exactly the ramifications of how it would change her life, there's this normal conversation going on about her uniform and what she has to have. And again, these are the voices off camera, which we hear a lot of in these movies, in this movie. And then we see her getting burdened with the hijab and getting cloaked with this big long frock. And we see the joy and the individualism and the choice, crucially, going out of her life. And we see the spark of cuteness and creativity completely evaporate. I don't know if they took this girl's school uniform shopping for real. And then her lovely red hair is hidden, and then she's not able to dance, she's not able to move, she's restricted. And that is a powerful scene, and it's an everyday occurrence in a place like that, where you're subjected to just the most low levels of censorship. So I thought that scene was very striking as well. And I think probably every vignette worked for me on many levels. We also get this other scene where this woman is applying for a job, and this guy is hitting on her and basically propositioning her in a almost, I'm not going to say Harvey Weinstein way, but in a Harvey Weinstein version of this world, where it's probably really hard for women to have jobs and have any choice and have any say. And while this scene is taking place, there's this very modern music in the background. This is a very hip, this is new Iran, but again, it's cloaked in the same type of sinister authoritarianness as well. And I've heard women say to me here, and they've all had an experience, if you speak to any woman, where there's some version of a situation like this. It mightn't be a boss, but it might just be an unwanted sexual advance, and in a place where someone has power, or some kind of awkwardness in a similar way. And I never really understood or had it depicted to me as a man in a way that I could understand how not to say how upsetting it is, because I can understand how upsetting, but I don't know whatever the opposite of empowering is. I don't know if depowering is the word, but you can really feel it in this situation where she's applying for a job and he's trying to hit on her, and he changes and starts speaking in English, and yeah, it's just a complete creepy and horrible encounter. And then straight after that, the vignette we get after that is some man trying to get his driver's license, and we get a sexual harassment scene. Although it's played ambiguously, it's certainly uncomfortable, and it is certainly a man being preyed upon by another man, where he wants him to take off his shirt to see his tattoos and read the verse. I think both of those juxtapose and contrast one after the other in the vignettes shows you that this type of oppression and violation can happen no matter who you are, if you're a certain class in society, I suppose, and not part of the government. And we even have that with the poor guy who is also applying for a job, and he's meant to act out how he would wash during prayer, and there's definitely a bit of a class element as well as a religious element to this scene as well. And yeah, these scenes are absolutely infuriating and engrossing and engaging, and really is conveying stuff to character, most importantly, because all these people feel like real characters. It almost feels like a documentary at times. And I remember I interviewed, what's his name? I keep on forgetting his name, but he writes Ken Loach's movies, and I asked him, how do you balance writing dialogue that feels like it comes from the character as opposed to dialogue that is conveying messages and your own belief system and things you're trying to convey? And he said that's the hardest thing to get right. And I think this movie gets it right at every turn. Maybe the film guy trying to get his film made, even though that scene was quite funny at times, where he is trying to get his life story into a film and it keeps on getting cut. I felt like that was the only time where maybe it's the filmmaker airing his grievance, or I don't know. That scene felt a little bit out of place, but almost every other scene, I just felt like I was watching characters go about the business, and I was just learning about this place through these great scenes. And I mentioned how the film is shot as well. I think it perfectly complements the tone and vibe and what is trying to be said and conveyed and shown in this movie. For one thing, we don't get to see the people dishing out this level of authority, and they're almost nameless faces. And I work or have worked in places where I guess I'm part of a system, and I've got to, I guess as part of my job, I've got to enforce a system that, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. I'm trying to enforce something. I don't even know how to phrase this. I suppose I'm trying to enforce things as part of my job description in the past that I don't necessarily fully agree with on a morality level. And after a while, it became easier for me to do because I'm a faceless, nameless part of a cog in the system. And I felt like the way that they showed, or rather didn't show, the person dishing out the end of this authority was brilliant, was an absolutely brilliant device, because if you are in that type of role, you do become a nameless and faceless part of the system, and you almost disappear within yourself to become a cog in the works. So we don't know what these people think. We don't know what these people's own beliefs are, the ones dishing out the authority. But we do know they've been put into place by a corrupt, diseased system to enforce whatever law or command that they are told to do. So I think that's a great central device of this, and not gimmicky in the slightest. I also think the lack of movement on the screen regarding the camera and the smaller box ratio is very good as well, because it helps us gain a subconscious understanding, I suppose, of the limited choices and the limited freedom and movement of these characters when they're in these scenes and situations, because you don't have a choice. You are just there at the mercy of whoever is telling you these things. So all these things work very well for me. And now I have to say, I'm not sure about the end scene where we have that old guy asleep and then an earthquake happens behind him. I think that's the one scene where I'm thinking, okay, maybe you're going a bit too symbolic here if I want to read it at that level. An old man, maybe while the old regime of Tehran is asleep, the city is falling apart on itself. I don't know. It just seemed out of place, and the effects seemed a little bit dodgy. On the other hand, if I'm not taking it literal, if I'm not taking it symbolic, and if I'm just taking it as another scene, I admire the ballsiness of a movie that's basically had still uneventful in an action sense up until now, end its movie with the camera actually moving and going past the sleeping man and showing an earthquake and devastation in the background. I think that's a nice touch on that level. Although for me it was a little bit jarring, but I guess you have to end your film somehow. And if you're going to end your film like that, followed by credits and a rock song in a movie that is very subdued and lacking rebellion in any way, then why not? But yeah, I don't know if we'll get to this movie anytime soon, but if you do, you can get back to me with your thoughts.
Hey man, just the dying embers of the weekend now. It's coming up on midnight on Sunday, so I'll be into the thick of it in a few hours, starting my work week. But the wife went to bed there a couple of hours ago. We watched some TV for the evening, and I just had just enough stamina left in the tank to check the runtime of this movie and see if I could squeeze it in. And I think it's 1 hour, 17 minutes. So I was like, fuck it, let's do it. I fired it up, and as you mentioned there, it starts with that shot of Iran, or of Tehran rather. The kind of big, huge, wide shot, and notably widescreen, because the whole rest of the movie, as you said, is in this kind of box aspect ratio. And that shot goes on for, I couldn't tell you how long that shot is. It could be only a minute. It could be less than a minute. It felt like a good, like 3 or 4 minutes. It's a really, really long, slow shot. And as I was watching, I was like, this looks really good. Like, I don't mean literally the shot looks good. I mean, like, this is a very intriguing and compelling start to a movie. But it's late on a Sunday evening. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to watch this movie. I don't, like, if the whole movie is this slow, like I had zero context for this movie. It's clear from the opening credits that it's an Iranian movie, so that's that's how little context I had going in. I didn't know what country it was from. I didn't know anything about it, and I obviously just knew that you had told me to watch the movie, so that's enough. And yeah, I was like, is this movie going to have dialogue? Is it going to be like Samsara, where it's just shots, just atmospheric shots? Is it going to have narrative, or is it just going to be pure art? Because, you know, there ain't many movies that start with just like what at least feels like about 4 minutes of a static shot with you know, not much in the way of like actual events happening on screen. So I was like, I really don't know if it's the right time to watch this, because it looks really good. It looks like this is intriguing me. It's a very atmospheric shot, but primarily in the sound design, or I say sound design, I don't know how to phrase it, but it's as you said, establishing the vibe of and the energy, you put it very well, of the city. There's many great movies, you know, countless great movies about life in a city, and this is a movie about life in a city that starts in this one simple static shot, which it's kind of like a time lapse, I guess, but it doesn't have that kind of jittery feeling of a time lapse. But just because the lighting changes, it seems to depict, you know, many hours, and we get like the swelling noise of traffic and the smog of Tehran. And I mean, you came back to that word energy over and over again. I would echo that. It really that shot and that the sound and everything, it really impresses upon you the feeling of the city in a way that's so brilliant on a filmmaking level that I was kind of worried that I'm like, this looks like it could be a really good film, and I might kind of fuck up my opportunity to watch this film by being too tired to watch it if it's as slow as it might be. Now then, it's not slow. That shot is amazing, but the whole rest of the film is completely different to that shot. For starters, there's no humans in that shot. It's just buildings, and it's a massive, big, wide shot, like, you know, taking in the whole of Tehran. And every other shot is sort of a medium shot, and every other scene, every other vignette is just one long unbroken shot of a person on the screen, with authority, as you said, authority figures off screen that we don't get to see. And I think every scene, other than the one of the little girl getting her school uniform, is the subject on screen is kind of in dialogue with the off-screen authority figure, whereas in the little girl scene, it's the dialogue is happening with both parties being off-screen. It's the little girl's mother and not authority figure, but someone. It's not necessarily authority figure, but it's someone who represents the establishment and is trying to is essentially in a position of impressing upon the people the sort of tyranny, I would say, of this restrictive government and religion. So yeah, opening scene, fantastic, but had me concerned about the pacing of the film. Immediately, the next scene is the segment called David, where it's, like you said, a new father going to the naming office and and wanting to call his son David and not being allowed because it's not it's not Iranian name. It's not a name that's like part of their religion. Funnily enough, my brother was forced to be called David because he had to have a religious name, and it was literally the exact same situation of my parents going to get him named, being refused the name that they wanted to give him because it wasn't a biblical name, and therefore having to call him David, which is just an exact, but it's exactly the same scene except the name, is changed. But as you said, we're from Ireland, and we have seen we grew up in a country that was post this era, and Iran is now transitioning slowly out of this. It will probably be 50 years or something before they get what we got in the late 80s and 90s when we were coming up, in terms of like unshackled from dogmatic rule. But even growing up in our era in Ireland, of course, like everything in this movie is very known to us because we, as you said, are children of a generation that can testify to this kind of like authority or authoritarianism, and not authoritarianism like Mussolini, but authoritarianism of like headmasters and priests and even just like bank managers or all of these important doctors, like important people in society. The power dynamics that exist are very evident, and they're all over this film. I loved this film. I thought it was brilliant. I've seen a lot of Iranian movies. Almost without exception, they've been fantastic. I would say, without exception, they've been about this subject matter, which always kind of amazes me in this country that's so restrictive. How the cinema that we see is so critical and in direct opposition of the kind of authoritarian, restrictive society that exists there. And sometimes I wonder, like, for example, this film, it starts with a very long, like minutes long shot of Tehran. And then every other shot in this movie could be filmed in a different country with Iranian actors, to the point where I wondered if that was the point of the shot, that we're going to give you one long shot that's very long and gets your brain completely locked into the idea that you're watching scenes within this city, and then therefore we can make this entire feature film far away from that restrictive regime. Now, I don't know if that's the case. I'll probably check that out now, because it's just a suspicion that I had in mind. But somehow the films that I watch, and maybe there's a great many Iranian films that are not like this and that curtailed more to the kind of the messaging that the government wants to put out. But the films that I watch are all about people trying to live within a awkward, bureaucratic, restrictive state. And yeah, I maybe it's a contradictory thing where you'd think that they wouldn't be allowed to make those kind of films there, but they actually are, because life is never as simple as like the most reductive way you can look at it. Or maybe the films that I see are kind of like they're not even available to see in Iran. I'd be curious to know that. I've seen quite a few of them. I've listened to a lot of like podcasts about Iran, and I did spend a month there many years ago, but I had some exposure to that kind of thing, like going to secret parties where they have alcohol, or that whole thing about like when you're with women in their own home, they're not wearing the headscarves, and then they have to wear their headscarf when they're out and about. And I know in recent years there's been that's really come to a head. sort of like the suffrage movement in the UK and I guess like many countries, where there was a lot of protesting, and now I think there's a little bit of a ability for women to be out in the streets and stuff, not wearing headscarf. I don't really know the fullness of the situation, but it's an interesting country, and it's in the throes, because pre the revolution it was as liberal as probably more liberal than Ireland, and then it's been very restricted, and now I think like it's the beginning of what will probably be a 50 or 100-year journey of that slipping away, and then just like eventually just completely losing that control. But this film is interesting because it's not like, it's not like you say the slightest thing out of line, you in any way challenge the powers that be, and you're just like thrown in a cell or something. Every scene in this movie shows you that there's a kind of a negotiation that goes back and forth between the people being limited and oppressed and the oppressor. It's a conversation, it's a debate, and that, I don't know, I just find that very interesting. These countries where maybe you can get away with this if you do it in the right way, maybe you can't, maybe you can get, like it's fascinating to see it play out in this way. And as you said, there is a version of this movie that's like a big blockbuster revolutionary thing, or just like some like, I don't know, the more classic 3-act structure, big scale, some single protagonist working their way through the court system, and the victories and the losses and stuff. But the way that they've chosen to depict the situation in Iran, at least in this specific subject matter, of just showing individual people in these small, quiet little moments that are very consequential to that individual, but in terms of the just day-to-day churn of a giant metropolis, are tiny little moments. Someone trying to get a driver's license, someone trying to find their lost dog. It's quiet little things that to the person that we're viewing on screen is a like seismic event, but to the bureaucrat on the other end, it's just like they'll have almost forgotten about that 5 minutes later. It's nothing. It's just the day-to-day grind of the city. It's not like someone being lined up against a wall and shot, like huge dramatic thing. It's just quiet little moments of tyranny, essentially. And that paints a very vivid picture. I mean, it's a very pointed film. It's trying to get across a point, which it very successfully does. And it's also just like a joy to watch acting and dialogue. Now, granted, we're reading subtitles, which A means you're not getting the original dialogue, and B means you're not able to look at the acting a lot of the time, because it's almost constant dialogue in this film. So your eyes are kind of darting up and down across the screen. But still, even with all of those abstractions, it is a joy to watch a film that for its entire runtime is just actors acting with high quality scenarios and dialogue. And that's it's great that you can kind of depict a whole city and era and political point or religious point or whatever in such a simple form. I mean, you reference mumblecore there. Like, I don't think this film, and I'm not saying you think this, but the film isn't like mumblecore in nature, because it doesn't feel improvised, but it's mumblecore in that spirit of like, well, we just need Microsoft Word and a camera and a few actors. That's really all we need to make a movie. Yeah, I found it very affecting. I found it very disturbing and unnerving. There's a trend that I often scoff at, where people describe basically every movie that has any amount of conflict or darkness in it as a horror movie. And for me, horror is like, when I think of a horror movie, I'm thinking a movie that's scary, Scream or something like that, rather than any film that has disturbing subject matter. Like, I don't consider Schindler's List a horror movie. I don't consider Wall Street a horror movie, but I understand the impetus to use that language because, these movies are about horrific subject matter. But this film, not that I would call it a horror movie, but like it in the way a horror film is both scary is one thing it can do, but also disturbing and unnerving and uncomfortable and just really fucking soul destroying. It is other things, or are other things, that horror cinema can do. There are scenes in this movie, and particularly this scene where the young lady is being interviewed. You described it as Weinstein-esque, and that's a very good point of reference. It's by a guy who's abusing his position of power to try and hire young women basically to advance upon them sexually, which we don't really get to see the fullness of what he might be capable of doing, but his agenda is, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And the way that scene plays out is brilliant from a writing and filmmaking perspective. And by brilliant, I mean like horrible to watch. As you said, it's like all women have this these stories, and I think one massive takeaway I've had in talking to my wife about this over the years is it's very easy for a man to understand why it's scary when a guy corners you in an alleyway and like throws you up against the wall or something like that. That's like so easy to understand why you would be on edge and scared in that situation. But what's harder to appreciate is when you're just having an innocent conversation with someone, but you don't know everything that they're capable of. Like you're talking to someone on a bus, they've in no way indicated that they're dodgy or that they have other intentions, and even that conversation could have progressed for minutes, hours, or even weeks or months, but the potential for there to be malevolent intentions under the surface are always hanging there. So this scene, I mean, obviously these are short scenes, so it cuts to that chase very quickly. But what this guy this unseen CEO guy or whatever, is able to do, which is something that these predatory men do, is he can always go, "What? Come on, relax." So he can row it back. He can go like, you try and make you feel like you're overreacting, or like, why are you being so weird about this, and like kind of gaslight you through it. So it's a brilliant scene, and that's the most unnerving. You said you found a lot of these scenes frustrating. Certainly they're frustrating, they're angering, but they're also so sad and so horrific, because you don't know how far it's going to go. And I think that's one of the most horrible things about living in the iron grasp of a sort of totalitarian regime, where these authority figures, or anyone who outranks you authority-wise, especially if they're kind of working for the state, but even if they greatly outrank you in a class level and they're more aligned with the state or whatever, you don't know how far they would take this. So therefore you have to kind of act like it could go all the way. So we have a scene of a guy who wants to get his driver's license, and so often it just feels like the person is almost like just on a power trip, and it's like almost trolling the person. They're fucking with them, they're playing with them. It's like a cat playing with a mouse, like playing with their food kind of thing. He knows this guy's got tattoos. He wants to it's like he wants that guy to feel like he can't get away with secrets, or that if he is given a license, it's only because that guy decided in like a godlike role to grant him the license. And he makes him show this bit and then this bit and this bit. And then that scene is one of the only scenes that's actually cut short before, maybe the only scene that's cut short before its conclusion, because it ends with him basically leading into, now I need you to take off your trousers. And, you know, we don't know where that scene eventually goes, but that is a really unnerving scene, because it's always this like chipping away. There's also the scene with the job interview, and I think, I could be wrong here, but I think the guy being interviewed is actually a Sunni Muslim, but it's pretending to be Shia, which is the dominant religion and the kind of power holding religion of the country. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that was my interpretation of it. And that scene likewise is a chipping away. It's a chip, like, ask you this, okay, maybe you pass that test, ask you this, position you here, lead you down this path. Like, it's such a controlling, horrible, like police interview room type of manipulative and invasive conversation that we get so often in these, not in every scene. Like the scene with the film director, which I agree is a bit out of place. It feels like because I've also read a lot about film directors in Iran and their negotiation with the state in terms of what they can and can't put in their films, and the penalties that they can face and stuff like that. So this it doesn't, unlike the other films or the other vignettes in the movie, the film director one doesn't feel like it's depicting part of average day-to-day life in Iran, and probably therefore should have been left out of the film, because it kind of imbalances it a little bit. But that scene, the guy who's talking to him, who's like a minister for culture or something, he's trying to get on side with the film director, but he wants to get his way, but in a friendly way. He wants the film director to agree with him and just go along with it. So it's a little bit different. So the dynamic is not always the same between the authority figure and the subject of that scene, but it is always this sort of like relentless position that's very hard to argue with. In fact, the one victorious scene, as to my memory, it's the only example of it where the victim, if you will, does manage to maneuver out of the situation. It's because she, and this is the one with the girl who's been dyeing her hair blue, and because Iranian people, they listen to punk music, they dye their hair, they have gay sex and do drugs, and they do everything, but they just have to completely hide all of this stuff. So this young teenage girl who's in school and is doing things that this female teacher doesn't approve of. She's able to kind of finally free herself from that specific power dynamic by the fact that she's filmed this female teacher perhaps having an affair or doing something that she shouldn't have been doing. So the only way that you can escape this like Gestapo-like surveillance is by turning the tables and you doing the exact same thing to that person, which is like quite a nice piece of irony there. And then there's the scene at the end, which is, I mean, not the very end, but the scene with the dog, which is an interesting one, because like you said, if you've been in that sort of bureaucratic, you're the mouthpiece of a bigger structure that you don't morally agree with, but the more you kind of exist in that role, the easier it becomes. And that's kind of just almost a script eventually. And you see with this police officer who's like, his initial thing is like, police don't don't pick up dogs. We're not doing that right now. There's no that isn't a process that's in place currently. That's not true. Then it's revealed that there's dogs back there. He's like, well, it's a German Shepherd. It's nothing like that. That's not true. Then it becomes clear that it's not her dog. But then he's like, you know what? It's probably at this particular police precinct. So he's like, these authority figures, they're not necessarily presented this way throughout the film that much, but they are still human beings who it would be very difficult, both just logistically difficult in terms of the penalties and the punishments that they would face, but even just psychologically difficult to break from that dynamic. But deep, within them, of course, they are humans that have compassion and empathy and stuff like that. However, unlikely that is to emerge within one of these moments. But the victims, if you will, make appeals to this on a regular basis, like if I show you my tattoos, will you give me the 2-year license? If I tell you the name of the boy that I was with, will you promise not to call my dad? Can you please help me out with being allowed to call my son David? Like, there is this tension between, can I tap into the humanity of this authority figure, and can I give him, I'll give you a bit of what you want and you give me, and we'll meet in the middle, kind of thing. So it's it keeps those scenes lively. I think if it didn't have that feeling of the person understanding that they're talking to a human that's got psychology and stuff like that, and it was more just like, they are like stormtrooper level, like no personality, no character, and that would get old pretty quick. You touched on the very, very final scene. You mentioned that you thought it had dodgy effects. I thought the effects were flawless in that. The earthquake scene, I thought it was interesting that a film that looks like it could have been made for like, practically nothing, had such a polished effects scene at the end, because I was assuming that there wouldn't be the buildings collapsing. I thought it would just be the walls shaking and the clock falling off the wall and stuff. But when the buildings through the window are revealed to be CGI, that was I was like, oh wow, they did a good job there. It is interesting. It is the only scene in the movie that's not like a literal, this is what happens, kind of day say. If you stop the movie just before that scene, if you pause it, so just at the end of the lady walking away with her, like dragging along her dog leash, then everything we've seen in the movie has been quiet in how stylistic it is. It's been stylish. It's a stylish movie, but it's been relatively understated. In fact, if you chop off the first 3 minutes of that static shot of Tehran, then it's all been uniformly the same, just like a shot of someone talking to camera, no music, no editing, camera movements, anything, just like static shots of people with title cards. But then we get that scene of the old guy in the office, and I mean, it's interesting. You seem to interpret it as like the authority figures sleeping at the wheel while the country crashes and burns or crumbles around them. I actually interpret it as this guy is the embodiment of the state, the government, the religion, the power holding parties, and he's a dinosaur. He's outdated, and there is an earthquake coming, meaning there's a revolution that's going to topple this this infrastructure and this power holding society or structure, whatever, however you want to put it. It to me, it felt like this is like a optimistic, like you watch the country. This is what the country's like. And then at the very end, it's like, and that's about to get shook to its very foundations. Now, I'm not saying that that is what the correct interpretation of that scene is. I'm just saying that's how it struck me. So it's interesting that we both watched that scene, which I think is supposed to be a kind of allegorical scene or something. I don't really see any particular reason for it to just be like a real scene, like everything else in the movie. It feels to be a symbolic visual that we're seeing. It's stylistically very different from the rest of the film. It's CGI, it's moving camera, it's widescreen, it's lit different. Like, it doesn't feel like it's the same thing that we're watching. But it is interesting that we both watched it. We both had different interpretations. I don't think either of us are like kind of locked down in like, it's clearly this. It's more just like it evoked different feelings in us. And I wonder if when you watch that film, you're supposed to get a specific, direct, clear interpretation, or if it's there as a sort of arty, we want to give people something at the end that's going to allow them to go off in whatever direction their brain kind of goes. And then it cuts to credits with like metal music playing over it, which is interesting. And I remember in Iran, there was a lot of metal heads there. And that was, you know, like many things, something that was kind of hidden away and had to be done privately. So yeah, interesting film all around. Yeah, really, we've both sort of noted that the director scene wasn't a piece with the rest of the movie. I think it'd probably be slight improvement to take out the director scene, but the director scene's still brilliant. Like, I think we both probably really enjoyed that director scene. It's just like, it's not the day-to-day life of your average civilian in Iran, and therefore it kind of struggles a bit to exist in that sequence of vignettes. But every single vignette in this movie I liked a lot. And often a movie like this, when I realize it's going to be this structure of just like, it's not like one ongoing narrative, but it's just like individual scenes, I kind of like, early in the movie, I'm like, well, I guess there's going to be some good ones, there's going to be some bad ones. And when a good one ends, I might be like, oh, that one's over. Well, okay, maybe the next one won't be as good or whatever. But it really isn't uneven at all. It's consistently strong the whole way through it. You're seeing, considering you can describe every scene in this film in a similar way, considering that they are very different from each other in the dynamic, in what's being discussed, in the feeling, in the characters, the personalities, all that kind of stuff. Even like what's being played out, like the job interview scene, we get a lot of like the guy miming washing and stuff, and that's like more physical and more kind of, he's standing up and he's moving around and stuff like that. And obviously the little girl dancing with her Mickey Mouse thing, and yeah, it's got a surprising amount of variety considering how little variety it kind of has on it in some ways. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed it in my direction. Be interested to hear how you came across it. It's not a film I'd heard of. That it doesn't surprise me that it's highly rated, and yeah, be curious to learn a little bit more about the production of the film, and what else this director or these directors have done on.
Hey man, glad you got to this movie in the end and liked it. It's another one of our hidden gems. I always look at IMDb and how many people have rated it or whatever. And for context, you mentioned Fish Story the other day. That is logged by about 1,600 or something. Miracle Mile is logged by something like 13,000 people. And Terrestrial Verses is logged by 1,400 people or something like that. And that's quite a low amount for all those movies, which are very good. So definitely definitely another hidden gem. Although this one, I've seen it on some critic circles and stuff like that, and a few lists here and there, but it's never going to get seen or have any kind of appeal to the broader masses outside of those type of circles. So it's good that I got onto it and then you got onto it. And you're telling me that your brother is named David because they needed a Christian name. What did your man want to name him? Out of curiosity. And you might have stumbled across my own origin story that I don't know about, that I need to ask my parents about, because my name's Andrew, which is one of the apostles. In fact, I'm 2 for 2 because my middle name is Andrew James. I've got 2 apostles. Pretty sure Michael is an angel. So I need to ask what names my parents considered. I could have been a Clint or a Ewell, since my dad is a big Western fan. Don't know what my mom had in mind other than Andrew, because anytime I asked her, why did you name me Andrew? She said it was because I looked like an Andrew. Maybe she forgot to leave out, and we had to choose from saints, Christians, and apostle names. So in that context, you look very much like an Andrew. But yeah, I'm glad you like this movie, and it sounds like you were much more horrified and disturbed than I was. And that's not to say I wasn't horrified or disturbed. It's just there's such a satire and comedic element to a lot of this stuff as well, that even though I definitely found it frustrating and absolutely tragic in many cases, there is an amusement and a certain type of way this is depicted at times, other than the ones with the sexual harassment elements, that there is a level of comedy to it as well that's enjoyable at times. You mentioned that you don't know if this was set in Iran or not. I had that thought early on. I think it is. Sorry, filmed in Iran, not set. I think it is filmed in Iran as well, to my knowledge. And you asked, how can there be no ramifications, and how can they be able to still do this type of movie in a country that is censorship and dictatorship and get away with it? Well, they don't really get away with it, because there was another Iranian filmmaker, I forget his name, that he was banned from making a film, and then he made a film about being banned from making a film. And this guy, after this movie, when he came back to the country, he was basically heavily censored and banned from making films as well. And his niece, who actually stars in this movie as the taxi driver, who also had a triumph of sorts, where she has to bring in her brother to get off the parking ticket for not wearing a hijab. She's the director's niece. She's very good in this as well. She lost her job and got banned and wasn't able to work anymore. So there definitely is ramifications. And so much so that this director's follow-on film, which I think is called Divine Comedy, is a movie about him screening his latest movie in a clandestine fashion. I haven't read too much about it, but he's almost doing pop-up film screenings and trying to showcase this other film that he's done, which sounds very interesting as well. So there is very much penalties and consequences for the things that we saw happened here in this movie. So I think it's very brave to make this type of film. And you mentioned the ending as well, and I hadn't really thought about that. And I think what it comes down to more than anything is maybe what you know or what you feel about Iran. You've spoken a lot more optimistically about that this is changing and that this regime will be gone in 50, 100 years. That's not the impression I got from my colleague, but I haven't had an in-depth conversation about it. And maybe she's just hearing them be terrified and upset about living in that country. So maybe even if it is 50, 100 years, that doesn't mean much to someone who's living there now. So that might have been the vibe I'm getting. But if it is true what you're saying about it's at the end of what has been a horrible time, then I do like your reading of the ending of this movie. And I guess how you'll interpret it will be how you feel about Iran's future. Like my interpretation, your interpretation, which I would align with more based on what you said. But I guess there's another interpretation because this guy in the building, there's all these files and there's all this bureaucracy, and he's basically asleep while an earthquake happens behind him, and it's almost like the country will collapse under the weight of its own bureaucracy and authoritarianism. Now, I don't know if that would be initially a positive thing when it happens at all. As we know, all revolutions are a bloody mess. But at least your reading is hopeful of it. And it made me think, this movie plays this every scene, well, not every scene, but a lot of scenes very straight. Like the scene of registering the name and all these type of things. I wonder if somebody who is watching this movie and from the persuasion of authoritarianism, that they believe all these things are good, if they're watching this movie, it doesn't do much moralizing other than, of course, that Harvey Weinstein creep. I think those would be the scenes where you're thinking, okay, this guy is having to go with the government. If you're not pro-government, I suppose. Like, I wonder, is there a version where someone's watching this movie, watching a lot of vignettes, and on the side of the authoritarianism of it all, thinking, yeah, of course you can't do that. Well, of course you can't do that. And they're almost happy that they're seeing a movie that's enforcing it. I wonder is there people who could watch that, and then I wonder what they would think the ending is conveying. I wonder would they have a different interpretation of the ending of, well, yeah, of course, if we're asleep at the wheel, then the city will fall apart, and that's what we're trying to stop happening, like retaining our values and retaining our cultures. I always wonder, because there's a lot of, not to say left wing, but these common values, underdog values, change, positivity, progressiveness, that is pretty much what you'll get from movies. So we're naturally on side for this type of thing. I wonder, is there somebody who watches It's a Wonderful Life and is saying, turn off this communist shit? Like, they really get a different interpretation from these things. I always wondered that. And I like what you said as well about the debate between the authority figure and the person trying to get something done, and there's a conversation going on. I find that interesting because at the same time there is wiggle room in the sense, well, you don't have to name your kid this, but you can have all these names, and you don't have to put the hijab and the veil on in the uniform fully, but everyone else is doing it. And I think it's more the illusion of choice and the illusion of options within this oppression and in these conversations is is what's really sinister in a way. And it's almost like us here. It's not the same level by any means. I'm not trying to say it is, but it's almost like there's two political parties. You see this in America as well, and there's people up in arms over which one is the best political party. I'm pro-Labour, I'm pro-Tory, I'm pro-Democrat, I'm pro-Republic, and there's people so divisive and championing these things. But at the end of the day, that's only the choices you have out in front of you. You can't really vote anyone else and have a chance of winning. So it's the illusion of choice and the illusion of options that is very sinister in these situations, and especially in this movie. There is a conversation and they're making it seem like you're having a conversation, but what it really is them leading you to the options that they have set out. But yeah, I'd be interested in seeing more Iranian films. I know anyone that has seen them and ones that have crept out from Iran seem to be championed. And there's a movie that I'm actually going to watch called, I think it's called The Sacred Fig Tree or something. It's got one of the worst titles ever for making me want to watch it, but apparently it's amazing. It's very long. I don't know what it's about, but maybe I'm warming up for some more cinema set around this country and topics and ideas.
Hey man, just walking home carrying my son here now, so he might be piping up in the background. My brother, they wanted to call him Morrissey, fans of the Smiths at the time, and I still call him Morrissey, so he's kind of half his friends call him David, half his friends call him Morrissey. But yeah, it's an interesting little echo of that in this movie. I'm named after the arcade. Well, I mean, I'm actually named after my grandfather, Michael. But of course, you know, he's named, or either he's named after his father, or he's named after. But at some point in the journey, in the lineage, it comes from the Bible, as all of our names do. All Irish people up to a certain age. Yeah, I like what you're saying about how like it kind of got that absurd comedy element to it. It's kind of like it's a very troubling and dark movie, but it's the edge is taken off it by this kind of like absurd comedy. So it's not like it's never super dark. Almost like Kafka-esque bureaucratic comedy. And just sort of like beyond that, the film has many different kind of flavors and tones and notes to it. Whether it's comedy, like I said, I wouldn't use the word horror personally, but that like incredibly disturbing, threatening, dangerous component to it. It's also like incredibly sad, but it is definitely funny and just formally very interesting. So there's surprisingly quite a lot to chew on in the film. And you talked about how like the makers of this film, when they got back to Iran, they were punished and banned from making other films. And yeah, I'm also aware of that other director whose name escapes me. All right, right down. Who I think the name of the film he made about not being able to make a film was called "This Is Not a Film" or something like that. And there's quite a few of these films out there that are Iranian films specifically that are about the limitations of making films in Iran, about the process, about the limitations. There's that other one, The Salesman, which is not about filmmaking, but it is about putting on a play. And it's interesting that it's a film industry that is such a fascinating and limiting and challenging process to actually make the films that it kind of forces the films to be a bit meta and be sort of like commenting on their very own existence. So
interesting kind of surrounding context there. And also on this like ending note, you were kind of commenting on how I felt optimistic about it, but you've got this manager who's Iranian who has quite a bleak outlook, and certainly the current regime, the current setup there is very bleak. And you're quite right. I think if I was Iranian myself, here comes Ice Cream Man. Kids will be going bananas about this now. It's like they can spot you a mile away. Or you're making a turn, thankfully. So yeah, the feeling that I have, which is the feeling I would have, it kind of, it's basically from the hindsight of growing up in Ireland in the 90s and kind of looking at Ireland now. I think it was the first country in the world to legalize gay marriage, and I've seen a country go through that progress. I can look back, not from personal experience, but I can look back at Ireland 100 years ago and kind of see what can be accomplished in a mere century of a place's history. And so when I look at Iran, I look at the beginning, the protests a few years back about wearing the hijab and everything, and just the fact that I've met so many Iranians in my life, and I see such an appetite for culture and free thought and modernization. Okay, geez Louise. That it seems to me a kind of inevitability that over a period of time, they will get past all of these restrictions. But that's all well and good for me to say as an outsider, because to me, 100 years of Iranian history is nothing. It's just like a blink of an eye. But to an Iranian, 100 years is like, they're not even going to see it happen. It's their life. Their whole life is going to be lived out in this more restrictive era. So it's optimistic in the bigger picture, but it's not really that much of it's not, you won't take much comfort from it as a person living in Iran today. That's that possibility of that trajectory. And then you also mentioned, like, what do you think it's like watching this film as someone who is aligned with the regime, someone who's pro-Iranian government, which I always find interesting. Like, there's so many people in this world that are like very uber-capitalist, extremely conservative and right-wing, and more or less every film ever made is vilifying greed and selfishness, and it's all about compassion and empathy and stuff like that. And I sometimes think, like, what's it like to be a school bully and watch Harry Potter? Do you see Malfoy and go, that's my guy right there? And you're like, yeah, wouldn't it be great to like pick on the poor little Harry Potter? Or do you somehow just not see yourself in the movie? Do you watch these films? Like, if you watch Gladiator, do you not see yourself in the tyrannical emperor? Okay, all right. He's really wanting to contribute to the podcast. He's very incredibly talkative at the moment. So yeah, I think, like you said, this film is a little bit of it's played pretty straight. So you could make the argument that, like, it's almost neutral enough that if you watch this film in support of the authoritarian figures, hang on, let me start his voice note until he stopped talking quite as much. Okay, take another stab at this. You could make the argument that the film is so sort of understated and neutral that if you watch, or so naturalistic that if you watch this film in support of the regime, in support of the authoritarianism and the extreme government and religious oversight, that you could maybe watch this film and be like, I don't see what the problem is. Like, this is just how you should be in, like, making sure that society is orderly and moral and righteous. I don't know. I think, to me, the film is it makes that that extreme authoritarianism seems so pedantic and petty and kind of confused and not inconsistent, but it just doesn't really come across as like this grand, like unified vision. It seems contradictory and just not really delivering any great consequence. It's not like we see anyone kind of bettered through this. So I feel like you might watch this and recognize your own actions in it and feel called out, I guess, and maybe even feel accurately depicted. But I don't think that anyone's watching this and going, yeah, this is a reasonable endorsement of the powers that be. But it would be interesting to watch this film with someone like this. I mean, it's a society where I would imagine the majority of the people who are upholding that restrictive control don't actually agree with it themselves, like in the kind of privacy of their own heart and soul. And maybe... Okay, hang on. It's very, very distracting, as I'm sure it is for you as well. But yeah, just the last point I wanted to touch on is you mentioned that sort of illusion of freedom that you get here, where it's like, we don't have to wear this, but this is what everyone else is wearing. You don't have to go along with this, but, you know, why wouldn't you go along with this kind of thing? And of course, we know that only too well. We know that because we were raised in the dying embers of an incredibly restrictive, dogmatic Catholic infrastructure. And all that was left to cling on to really was suggestion and guilt tripping and stuff like that, rather than like iron cast law. So yeah, this is a film is a great showcase of that kind of power being wielded. I'll cut it off again now here before he pipes up again.
Sounds like your son is very pro-Iranian authoritarianism there. You wanted to silence your voice. But yeah, I guess that's Terrestrial Verses. And I'll be checking out the director's next film because I feel like it's an almost follow-on to the consequences of this movie, both thematically and actually. So I'll report back to you about that when I do get to see it. I'm not sure it's actually out yet, but it's at a few festivals.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.